Thanks, Ken. That was a long introduction, and I thank you. And maybe Marlon Brando is right. You know, I left academia 10 years ago because I was afraid. I had all these negative role models at MIT of grumpy old professors, and I didn't want to become a grumpy old professor. So instead, I've become a grumpy old entrepreneur, and we're gonna see some of that today. So I want to talk about robots and learning, and there's a lot of really exciting work that's going to go on in the next few years in robots and learning. There's a lot of exciting work that has gone on, but it's really hard work, and I'm going to say some of the reasons why it's really hard. And as Ken mentioned, I've been blogging recently, and I think that AI is very overhyped at the moment. Machine learning is very overhyped, and robots are overhyped. So we're sort of talking about stuff here that's overhyped in every dimension. And why is it overhyped? But at the same time, this is a new talk, so I don't have the flow. I made this talk for this audience. So the next couple of decades, and I'm going to talk about this later, there's going to be a tremendous pull on robot applications. Whether people in this room do it or not, there is going to be a demand for robots in lots of applications, and I'll talk about that. Machine learning is going to help in many ways with that. The world needs you to do this, but you need to be smart about it, especially amongst all this hype. It's easy to get carried away. And the core of the current hype levels, I see 7 mistakes that people make. And I'm going to talk through this, and then I'm going to switch into more future sorts of things. Why is AI and machine learning in particular overhyped right now? The first thing is people are overestimating in the short term. And this is Roy Amara. He was president for the Institute for the Future in Palo Alto, just up the road. We tend to overestimate the effect of a technology in the short term and underestimate the effect in the long term. And we do this again and again. Probably no one here saw this movie when it came out, Desk Set, 1957, Spencer Tracy and Katharine Hepburn. And the plot was, there's Spencer Tracy on the left, Katharine Hepburn on the right. Katharine Hepburn was a librarian in a large company. Back then, if the executives wanted to know something like, what's the population of Ghana, they would call up on a telephone, which actually was a telephone. They'd call up the librarian and say, what's the population of Ghana? And the librarian would go and look in their reference library and tell them what the population of Ghana was. So Spencer Tracy in this movie, 1957, comes along with this mainframe computer with punch cards and line printer output, and the plot is that it's going to replace the librarians. They're no longer going to have a job. And this is when, you know, the cycle time on these machines was maybe 10,000 instructions a second, no network, and just punch cards. Total overestimate in the short term. Of course, they fell in love because it was a Spencer Tracy, Katharine Hepburn movie. But total overestimate in the short term. But no one in 1957 was thinking about these things we'd have only 50 years later, these amazing devices which we all carry in our pockets. So we underestimated totally in the long term what computers would be able to do. And if you think we weren't underestimating it, go look at original Star Trek, set 300 years in the future, and think, look at what the people were talking the computers would be like 300 years in the future. Even in the 90s, and I'm a Trekkie, but even in the 90s, in the Next Generation, when files were too big, you had to carry them around in the ship. They couldn't go over the network inside the ship. Total underestimate in the long term. And we do that again and again. We've done that with GPS. We've done that with solar power, wind power, even blockchain, underestimate in the blockchain-ish things. So we underestimate in the long term, but we overestimate in the short term. And people are overestimating too much. People also assign magic. Arthur C. Clarke had 3 laws. I probably should personally worry about being wrong for the first law there, that last clause. But I really want to talk about the third one. Any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic. And this is people outside of AI and machine learning, people, let's not name Elon Musk or Stephen Hawking or anyone like that. but people outside who don't really understand the stuff, and so they think it's magic. And then once something's magic, you can do anything. You know, suppose you did have a little bit of magic technology, a time machine, okay? Now let's go back to the late 17th century and nab this guy, Isaac Newton. Actually, let's get old Isaac Newton after he's written Principia, and let's take him in this time machine to the chapel at Trinity College. Where are we? Yeah, in Cambridge. Now, we'll turn off the electric lights and just light the candles. He comes in the time machine. This was been around 100 years when he was there. Everything's fine. You know, he doesn't realize he's gone in his time machine. And then we give him an apple. Oh, not that one, that one. So now remember, he was the guy who figured out optics, you know, with a prism and split out light and put it back together. And you give him this thing, and it's glowing, and there's no fire, there's no sunlight, and there's all these vivid colors. And then you show him, you know, you play a movie on it of an English country scene of the animals, so he doesn't realize that he's traveled in time. It's amazing. And then you play some church music that he would have heard on this thing. Wow, that's a real weird way. And then you go on the web and you go to and you can find this online, his personal copy of Principia with his handwriting annotation, and you show him that, and you use a little stretch gestures and show him his handwriting inside that box. And then you say, okay, how's this work? I don't think he's going to have a chance. And he did figure out gravity. You know, he did figure out optics, but he doesn't have a chance of figuring this out. He wouldn't know, for instance, because he was, you know, we're 100 years before Michael Faraday, he wouldn't know that it's not going to run forever. Prisms run forever. He doesn't understand that anything about electricity and batteries, so he would think, oh, well, it works. It will work like this tomorrow, the next day, the next day. And then you show him the calculator and how accurate it is, and you have it count his steps as he walks around. He wouldn't be able to tell whether this thing might transmute lead to gold, which was one of the things he was really interested in. But to him, it would be utter magic, inexplicable. And that's what I think a lot of the press is doing today. It's seeing something they don't understand and then generalizing it to be magical. Performance versus competence. Famous picture on the front page of New York Times, November 2014, from Google, with deep learning putting an annotation on an image. A group of young people playing a game of Frisbee. Fantastic performance. But when we see someone, a person, perform something, when I see Jean-Jacques, do some differential equations, I think he can probably do integration too. I know his performance. From his performance, I know how to generalize to his competence in an area. If a person labels this image like that, you could probably ask him a whole bunch of questions. What's the shape of a Frisbee? Roughly how far can a person throw a Frisbee? Can a person eat a Frisbee? Now, we all know that the deep learning networks can't answer any of these questions. But the press sees, oh, it says it's people playing Frisbee, and they'd use the same generalization in their head that they would for Jean-Jacques, and they're wrong. So the difference between performance and competence for our machine learning systems is very different than the relationship between performance and competence of people. People make a lot of mistakes. Exponentialism. This is a real disease. I think it's gripped the world for so long because exponentialism from Gordon Moore's law from 1965 is what has driven the technology of the world. He only had 4 data points, by the way. 4 data points. There's a null data point down there, and 4 data points. And he predicted, drew a straight line between them, and he was right. He was lucky. And then it went on for 50 years. But the reason that Moore's law works is because when you halve, it's the digital abstraction, 0, 1. You've got a pile of sand on the table. Is there a pile of sand on the table? You can answer yes or no. Take away half the grains of sand, still the same yes/no answer whether the thing is there. So in the information content of being there or not being there is impervious to halving the physical amount of stuff. And that went on until we got down to so small there's not enough electrons to still have that abstraction for voltage. And people have got to think everything in technology is exponential. No, in fact, there was a 4.5-page paper that Gordon Moore wrote. The last half page of that 4.5-page paper was saying where this didn't apply. For instance, in energy storage. He said, it doesn't apply there. But people have gotten so used to Moore's law and charts like this from Ray Kurzweil, updated by Steve Jurvetson, about computation speed. People got so used to it, they think it applies everywhere. In fact, when I was running CSAIL, and I had to drum up research money, I used this data on the left. It was how much memory a $400 iPod had. And sometime between June and September, every year for 5 years in a row, a new iPod would come out, and it was just beautiful data. Gregor Mendel would have been proud of this. Doubled every year. And so I would say to potential sponsors, hey guys, you better watch out. Things are going to be really weird because by 2017, there's going to be 160 terabytes in your iPod. Well, what's the reality? Reality is it's the same amount as there was in 2007. The different models, the iPhone and the iPod. There still is an iPod, which is not an iPhone. And why is that? Well, because what was driving it was people's need to put their music on these things. And by the time they got to 160 gigabytes, everyone's personal music collection fit. They didn't need it anymore. And then we went to networks, et cetera. You don't need to have it with you physically necessarily. So this exponential was driven by the technology, but also by the customer. And we shouldn't forget about the customer. And when the customer was satiated, it went away. So we trip up over exponentials. Eventually, there are limits to growth on everything. We've seen that now in the speed and the amount of computation for a single core. We've reached that limit. We can't halve the feature size anymore. Sometimes, like with that iPod, economics stops us in its tracks. We have a disease, which I just hear so many people on TV saying it's exponential growth, it's exponentially better. And if you tried to explain to any of those people, oh, that means that there's a time constant over which amount is amount times another constant regularly at that time constant, they'd be, what the hell are you talking about? No, it's big, it's exponential. It's not exponential, most of the stuff people talk about. And here's the last one, and I'm not going to name Ray Kurzweil, but exponential equivalences are not functional equivalences. This is a diagram, and this is a little old, of the calculations per second per $1,000 against the year. You can see the last plot was 2000, and a prediction from that. That prediction is held up. Absolutely, it's held up. And will probably continue to hold up. But we're in 2017. Let's look over on that bottom axis, rise up there where, oh, we should have a mouse brain right now. We've got enough computation to have a mouse brain, but we don't have anything, any AI system, anywhere near as smart as a mouse. So I'm afraid for poor Ray. 2029, he intends to download or upload his brain to Google servers and be immortal, because there'll be enough to have him computing in the background there. But we don't know how to do it. So the exponential equivalences are not functional equivalences. The world is a Hollywood scenario. Hollywood recipe for a movie. Take the existing world, add just one item, fantastically powerful new technology, and you see what happens. And that works, I think, well for when the aliens show up, because they got fantastic new technologies. But in real life, it happens a little differently. So here's Bicentennial Man, Robin Williams, thinking, talking robot, able to interact, able to desire something better for himself. And look in the bottom right-hand corner. He's serving breakfast to the family there. And look what's going on. She's got paper for her homework, and he's reading a newspaper. They got a a complete humanoid robot that we're not going to have for years, and he's still reading a newspaper. What about in Blade Runner with Rachel there? She's a replicant. She's a robot. How does Harrison Ford communicate with her? He uses a payphone. Okay? So the point here is Hollywood adds one thing, but doesn't add all the other stuff that goes on. And people who will remain nameless, as Stuart here, talk about how we're going to have these super intelligent systems in our current world, but it's not going to be our current world. So of course, we're not going to have a factory which, told make paper clips, uses the whole infrastructure of the world to build paper clips, because it's not just going to come about. Before we have one that is so maniacal about building paper clips, we'll have one which will cheat a little bit and try to get a few extra resources, and we'll notice that. And it's not going to just plop down in front of us. I like to say, that before we have the super intelligent robots that decide we're useless and want to get rid of us all, we'll have some really grumpy robots around us. And we'll know, and we'll change things as we go. So, yeah, just plain dumb. In reality, the existing world and the new technology co-evolve. And so that doesn't mean there's not going to be challenges, but it's not going to be all at once that we see. And that's, again, what happens with a lot of so-called thought leaders about how dangerous AI is or what AI is going to do in the next few years. Speed of deployment. And I think we're really, oh, I got some questions for you. When did the first self-driving vehicle travel 10 plus miles at 55 miles an hour down a freeway? Anyone know?
89.
What?
89?
89, that's a good guess. 1987. Ernst Dickmann's, the Bundeswehr in Munich. Now, I think most people today, they think self-driving cars are brand new. When are we going to get the first hands off steering wheel, feet off pedals, vehicle drive coast to coast across the US? When do you think that's going to happen? It's going to happen in 1995. Takeo Kanade and Chuck Thorpe at CMU. The point here is, people say, oh, now, Google has self-driving vehicles. They're going to be deployed everywhere. We've had self-driving vehicles for a long time, and it's taken 30 years and they haven't got deployed. Doesn't mean it's going to be another 30 years, but just because something is possible for the first time doesn't mean it gets instantly deployed. It takes a long time, and how far we are along that trail is open to argument and reality. Now, for low marginal costs, you get speedy deployment. So Facebook, for instance, deploys new software, a few times an hour for non-revenue components. Why? Because all the software comes over the web interface. It's in the browser. The code is downloaded whenever you click on the Facebook page or go to the Facebook page, and so it's as marginal cost of deployment is close to zero as you can get. And if it's not revenue generating, failure doesn't matter too much. Revenue generating components for ads, they have more like a 2-week cadence. And so I think Silicon Valley tends to think about deployment like this. The old story, build it and they will come, invent it and it will get deployed. In real life, stuff doesn't get deployed like that. So many cars that are being delivered today, which are not self-driving cars actually, will still be on the road in 2040. So we're going to have cars, self-driving cars interacting with non-self-driving cars at least till 2040. Houses, they're around for 100 plus years. It's high marginal cost of putting a new one out there, so they don't just change magically. Our B-52s that we have in the US, B-52H were all manufactured between 61 and 63. They're still flying, and they're predicted to fly at least until 2040 and perhaps for 100 years total. Now, this is an existential thing for the United States, having those bombers, but they don't get changed. And if suppose we had a crazy president and there was a, nuclear war going to happen, how would we defend ourselves? We would use 8-inch floppy drives to boot up the ICBMs. That's what the technology is. It doesn't change. And I think in Silicon Valley, we think everything is just, trickle down. Change the top level stuff, it all goes down. No, there's incredible impedance. In fact, factory automation uses programmable logic controllers. Has anyone here used a programmable logic controller? Okay. They're essentially a replacement for electromagnetic relays. 1967. Actually, the guy who invented them in 1967 just died last week. It's an obituary in the New York Times. And the way most people still program them is with ladder logic, and ladder logic was a way of building circuits of electromagnetic relays that didn't have instabilities in them, so it restricts how you were allowed to wire them together in this emulated system in software. And I was with the major Japanese supplier of PLCs in August, and they told me, yeah, we try to have 3 software releases every 20 years. So that's the cadence of things moving along. Tesla is hiring PLC techs in Fremont. So it's not just old fuddy-duddy companies. It's the ones we hold up as the highest standards of modernity with AI, PLC techs. And if you go over to the Gates building at Stanford, this is the Maria, you remember this robot, Maria. Now, the gold arm at Stanford, and look at that gripper there. That was the gripper that Maria and I used 40 years ago at Stanford. Parallel jaw electric gripper. And this is what my company delivers today. It's the same thing 40 years later. So technology doesn't just trickle down into the real world. It's a real hard push. And AI in general hasn't passed the threshold of trust and utility. And I think AI mostly operates today where it doesn't matter if it fails. It doesn't matter too much for most things if it fails a bit. Lastly, I want to talk about suitcase words because that gets to what we're talking about. Suitcase words are words that we AI researchers use to describe an AI system which apply to something that people do but have lots and lots of different meanings in them. And some of the suitcase words, and for academics here, your news office at your institution always wants to get the best story and put it out. So you show them something you're doing, and they say, "Oh, it's hallucinating." Yes, and then there's a press release. Researchers at such and such a place have made robots that can hallucinate, play, recognize, understand. But the one we're talking about here is learn. And learn, there's a lot of different sorts of learning. I can't quite tell whether I'm, yeah. These are very different learning experiences for a human. Learning to talk, learning my way around the one-way streets of Cambridgeport, learning to use chopsticks, learning to use ancient Latin. They're all very different sorts of learning. A lot of you have done these things, some of them, if not all of them. And it's a very different learning experience from each other. They're different. And so when we're thinking in machine learning and we've got one tool that we keep applying everywhere, well, maybe there's more things we should be looking at. And I'm glad that Ken mentioned Australia, because there are 20 species of bandicoots, second to last one, in Australia. Now, if you go, a lot of you probably don't know what a bandicoot looks like, but if you go to the Wikipedia page, there is one image of a bandicoot. After you look at that, one image, you will be able to tell a bandicoot from a non-bandicoot, including all 20 species, forever. One instance of one image. Very different sort of learning experience that we talk about. Oh, yeah, so this height, I love this story. This was last week. Just be careful, about your hype. Great headline. So, robots and learning. Why do we want learning? Ken sort of made it sound like it was a divine right that we should have learning in robots. He was a little shocked that it wasn't the big news at NSF last week. Why would you have learning with robots? And there's a few different motivations, and I think they're all good. I think it helps be clear. To see what you can make robots learn, that's one motivation. Doesn't mean it has to be practical. It just means, look, I can do it. We can make it learn this. You might use it to find new pressures to expand or extend machine learning. You might use robots as a sandbox for new sorts of machine learning, new sorts of ML. Or you might use it to make robots more practical in some sense. And these could be very different motivations, but I think it helps to know what your motivation is. I'm going to use this, when you got something, and is Jan here this morning? Jan's going to give a great talk tomorrow. Jan is going to show, and I love Jan, he's going to show how deep learning can be used for all sorts of things you wouldn't have thought it can be used for. I'm pretty sure that's what he's going to talk about because I saw him talk last week, and he says he just shuffles his slides a little bit for each talk. So you got this, you got this convolutional neural network, and you see a nail, you go hit it with it, hit that nail. And that's not real interesting unless it goes back to those motivations. It won't go backwards. Okay, I can only go forwards in this talk. Sometimes, there's different ways to hit a nail. Maybe I went virtually backwards. Oh, there it is. And, human and hammer together. And sometimes there's all sorts of different hammers, different sorts of machine learning, and they can be very interesting. And I think this is where people should be looking, not to use the current systems, but to use new systems. And you get some really interesting stuff, like that one on the bottom right-hand corner. Which end do you hit stuff with on that? It's sort of ambiguous. It's an exciting one. And maybe it's not just, am I supposed to point this somewhere? Anyone know? I don't know where the receiver is. So there's a human at the other end. Oh, there's a human. Oh. Isn't technology great? There's a human between me and what happens? Technology's wonderful. This is Google. See, I'm right. It doesn't get deployed. I'm not giving you a hard. I'm just making fun of technology, not you. Now he's doing something. No? Okay. So sometimes it's not just the hammer you have, there's other tools you need to use with it. And I think it's worth thinking about that instead of, I want to publish a paper and I'm going to make convolutional networks learn X and learn Y and learn Z. Let's make something interesting in the world. And creating something that's going to be used, it has to be useful to some end customer of some sort. Someone's got to want to use it. And to be useful, it has to be less trouble than it's worth. And I think this is a terrible mistake that I see people in academia make all the time, and people in companies like Snap make all the time. Well, it's so whizzy. Of course they'll just have to do X and Y and Z, and then they'll be able to use it. People don't do X and Y and Z and then be able to use it. People don't want to be bothered with stuff. So it has to be less trouble than it's worth. It has to enable either something new, or make something cheaper, or make something work more often, or make something faster, or make something easier to do. It's got to actually have a real benefit to that customer, whoever the customer is. And to be truly useful, there's a couple of different places learning might happen before the product, and I'm using product in a generic sense here, gets to the end user, or while the end user is using the product. But always, minimal cognitive or logistic overhead by the end users is important. And I've discovered this again and again and again. When the first Roomba came out, it had 3 buttons on it, S, M, and L. No one read the manual. What the hell is S, M, and L? Oh, it's for a small, a medium, or a large room. Is this a medium room or a large room here? There's a lot of cognitive overload. So modern Roombas have 1 button. It just has clean on it. Press that button. Minimum cognitive overload, or minimum cognitive load. And I think in academia, and I count Google as academia for this purpose, we tend to think of the end users in terms of ourselves, and the end users are not ourselves, and they can't ask us anything. So it's just got to get out there and work and be self-explanatory. And by the way, in my current company, I found that some end users do not want, under any circumstances, the behavior of the robot to change once it's been commissioned in the production line. You know, we can say, well, but the learning is going to make it better and better. I don't want it to change. I know what it does now. You cannot have anything change. Oh, and you want my data? Forget it. We got a lockdown on this floor here, and you can't use any system beyond Windows 98. Really. Anyway, so end users can be even grumpier than me, and they may not want machine learning. There's lots of types of things to learn. I'm sure there's going to be papers on all of these, but the last bullet's the important. Be original. Don't be like everyone else. Do something new. And then there's the Baldwin effect. Who knows the Baldwin effect? One or two, three know the four know the Baldwin effect. And now I'm going to go off, and it's going to sound like esoteric stuff, but then I'm going to prove to you that it's really important for machine learning. So an evolutionary biological theory from 1896, James Mark Baldwin, South Carolina, was that an animal can learn to adapt to rapidly changing environment. You know, if an animal can learn, then that's good for it. But when the environment has changed, it may become advantageous to evolve to know the new stuff from birth in the new environment, because then each individual doesn't have to go through the trial and error of learning again. So you've got an animal over here that's good at learning in some environment. New environment comes along. The animals are learn enough to be able to adapt to the new environment. Then Baldwin said, well, maybe it makes more sense then for those animals to now evolve to know that stuff, because they're in this new environment. They're going to be there for hundreds of thousands of years, so that they don't have to perhaps fail to learn. And it looks like it's Lamarckian. People know what Lamarckian is? You know, Lamarckian evolution would be that something that you as a parent learn, you pass on to your children genetically. For all us parents, we know that is not true. And so this looks Lamarckian, but it's not Lamarckian. It's neo-Darwinian. And why the hell could this be relevant to a machine learning conference? Because Geoffrey Hinton published a paper about it in 1987. And he showed, using machine learning and genetic algorithms, that it could occur. And this was before it had been observed in nature. So it was one of the few cases where computation preceded validating a theory. And since then, it has been observed in nature. But what has this got for robots? Okay, suppose you decide, I wish I had a suction cup here. Suppose you decide that for your paper at the next CoRL, 2018, you're going to learn to pick up books, okay? And you know, you've got suction cups. You know what happens when you pick that up with a suction cup. Okay, not a good way to pick up a book. But you have some other sort of hand, and it learns thousands and thousands of trials, and it learns a couple of different techniques to pick up a book. And now, you know, Amazon wants to come and buy your company, because now they're going to be able to put the books in the packaging. You know, the final packing of stuff is still not automated at Amazon. So you've got this robot that has learned how to pick up the book, but maybe what you should do now is go and look and examine the strategies that it learned, which was surprising, and now optimize the hell out of them and build it from first principles. Call up Matt Mason if you need some help on this. And that's going to be more efficient than the learn thing. So we're all excited about learning here, but maybe learning doesn't actually apply at runtime in the robots at the end. It just tells us how to build better robots, maybe. I made this word up, I can't even say it. Baldwinization may be in order for robots. So now, getting from an academic paper to real use in the world. PhD thesis to commercial system. You know, well, not everyone, I'm sure there's people here who don't care about it, but I think a lot of people in Silicon Valley care about this greatly. You know, what's the next company I'm going to start? And so you've got this, did that work? You've got this brilliant idea, okay? The brilliant idea and it was paper, got accepted, it was good paper, but it's really only 10% of the problem. There's another 90% that you have to do after that to make it real. And now, you've got a robust demo that you can go and raise funds with. And then there's another 90% on top of that to turn it into a real product. And then there's another 90% for manufacturing, marketing, sales, distribution. You know that brilliant PhD idea in the middle there? It's starting to be a small piece of the total amount of work. Because now you can go and get public funds or institutional funds and no. And is that not working, or are we clicking? Can someone click? Please click. There it is. So now we're ready for the public markets and get the last 90% on top of that to scale. So there's a bunch of orders of magnitude before the smart idea. So you come up with a smart idea, you try and put it out into practice. It's only a tiny piece of it. You got to hire a lot of people you don't like working with, salespeople and stuff, and deal with VCs. I'm sure some are in the room. I've nothing to say anymore. And this is actually a diagram from deployed systems. You know, I'm going to go backwards. Yeah, it's working. The brilliant idea is that tiny little thing, way down there, 5 orders of magnitude away from 4 orders of magnitude away from reality. But when you jump on that bandwagon, that determines a lot of what's going to happen. Forward, no forward. Can I go forward? There we are. Okay, so this is the life cycle of some sort of product, some sort of thing. It's time across the bottom, and a percentage above. And the bottom line there, well, I can't click on it. The bottom line shows how much you're actually expending. To start off with, you spend very little money. But the decisions you make at the start determine the total cost of the system way ahead of time. So those early decisions, when you're hardly spending any money, have an incredible impact on what the history of the system is going to look like towards the end, and what the cost is going to look like, and what you can change. So be careful about that first idea you have that you try to put out into a company, that first machine learning idea. Because if it's not right, it's going to drive up the cost right from the start. And sometimes you're going to have to kill your favorite intellectual baby. It's just the way it is. So I recommend not falling in love with your intellectual babies too much, because you're probably going to have to get rid of them a lot. But what's really going to drive us over the next 20 or 30 years, I think, is megatrends that have nothing to do largely with us here in this room. Those megatrends are going to happen. We're not going to be able to control them. But let's think about them, because that's going to tell us where things are going to be important. What are the megatrends? Well, we know climate change. That's happening. It's just going to happen. What's that going to do to the world? We're having urbanization. That's happening. Lots more people are moving to cities. Cities are becoming bigger and bigger, and more of them. We're all going to end up like me and Jean-Jacques. We're going to just be old guys sitting there. A lot more old people, a lot less younger people. So the demographic inversion of the age profiles to more elderly, yes, less younger people. And biotechnology, synthetic biology, that sort of thing. There's 4 things that are going to happen. How's that going to affect the world? Oops. How are they going to interact? How will they change the world? And what are they going to make pulls on robotics? And then where does learning come into that? And if you think about this, maybe you can, being successful, a lot of being successful is being lucky to be in the right place at the right time. If you think about these things, maybe you can figure out where the right place and the right time is, or at least get nearer to it and change your luck. So just on demographic inversion, this is the, I got this from the CIA World Factbook. This is the population structure of China in 2016, men on the left, women on the right. in 5-year groups, and you see there's just been a tremendous drop-off in the number of 19-year-olds happening. We know how many 19-year-olds there are going to be 15 years from now in China. We know that. It's undeniable. We can't manufacture more babies than already exist. But we've gone from that older 25 to 29 group down to the 15 to 19-year-old group. It's been about a 30% drop. And what has that done to China? They've lost the labor base for manufacturing. And so China is going heavily into robotics for manufacturing because they don't have the workers anymore. The age of cheap labor in China for manufacturing is gone. Robotics is being pulled in to replace it. So here's how these trends, mega trends, can affect things. And robotics in this case, it's really changed the policy inside China. They've had over 4,000 robotic startups in the last 2 years, encouraged by the government. 4,000 robotic startups. That's, not even Google can buy that many. Here's the demographic inversion in Japan. The population is starting to drop. And it's going to be over a third of the country is going to be over 65 by 2045. Professor Asada, watch out. There you are. It's going to be like this. Yeah. Here's Europe in 1950, and look what happens between then and 2050. Same thing. Same thing in North America. A lot more older people, a lot less younger people. As I said, it's already had impact in China on low-cost manufacturing. These, by the way, I took this photo in 2005. This was people building robots in China. But we see the era of massive numbers of people working being harder and harder to sustain in China, and robots taking over. And not just in manufacturing, but food production. There's people processing chicken. That chicken that you eat is processed by people. So robotics in food processing. Another thing that's happening in the world, and I'm having trouble getting this to press. Did that go? Can we go forward? One, please. I don't know whether I'm controlling it or not. Can we? Who? Oh. Is someone controlling it or not? Okay, we don't know. Okay. I forgot it was here. I'll come over here and make it happen. So, this if you Google elder care, this is the happy pictures you get. This is not reality. This is marketing. As people get older, they want independence, they want dignity, they want to stay in their own home. This is what, I don't know if Aaron Edsing is here, this is Aaron's PhD thesis. This was a simulation of a kitchen for a simulated robot, and at his thesis defense he pointed out what his kitchen looked like. So we got to learn how to deal with the stuff on the right if we're going to have robots help people stay in their home longer. And we got to get in those narrow little spaces between the fridge and the counter. And we got to reach into that pile of stuff on the countertop and grasp in there, not on those nice clean tables on the left. And as people get older, they need physical help. So robots giving physical help to people is going to be important. I know that in the case of my mother, she could have stayed in her own home for 3 years longer if she had been able to get into and out of bed without an attendant. If there'd been a robot device, which could have helped her into and out of the bed, that would have been something that would allow her independence to last longer. So robots that can manipulate people, which is a hard task, manipulating people, and helping them in various ways. By the time when you get to this stage, it's not this happy in real life. When you get to this stage, and I know this is coming, I'm going to be wearing a diaper. It's just horrible. This, by the way, we know what this is. It's an elder care robot. Driver assist lets people drive longer, lets them maintain their independence longer. But other things, other trends happening in the world are agricultural production is going to change dramatically. What does that mean? Well, we see synthetic biology trying to build meat, and we see a lot of those companies starting up. But we'll also see indoor farming, and indoor farming on an industrial scale. And on that industrial scale, instead of having people go around and go up and tend to things, there's going to be a tremendous pull for robotic devices. They may not be humanoid robots by any means, but robotic devices, machine learning about growth and growing, and robotic devices to do the physical stuff to look after the farming. There's going to be an amazing pull on that in the next 10 to 20 years. We've already seen in fulfillment, gone from manual systems to the upper thing there, Kiva type systems, moving the shelves around, but they're still bringing them to you can see in the middle of that image there, a guy in a purple shirt who's the picker that the stuff is brought to, and then there's the packers at the end in the bottom. So that's still all done manually because we just don't have robots that can do it fast, do it well. Tremendous opportunities for machine learning there. If anyone's from right-hand robotics here, I think they're already doing some of this. So there's lots of pull on fulfillment. And then the final step, getting it to the customer. That's why we see people talking about drones, sort of robot, and that's why we see people, this is a company from Latvia, I think, delivering packages in a city. But the real thing that we run up against is stairs, the final 3 meters into the house. And I was talking to someone before, do you think there's any role for legs? Well, maybe there is a role for legs, for getting up those stairs and into houses. And a role for learning your way around, learning to recognize stairs, learning all sorts of things about that. Oops. So I think there's going to be, those demographic trends are going to push manufacturing, food processing, fulfillment, elder services, driver assist, and even self-driving cars come from market pull and mega trends. That's going to happen, whatever we do in this room. It might be fun to be part of the solution and get some real stuff to happen in these areas. So challenges for robotics, I think we need better robot hands. We need better grasping. We need visual grasp affordance recognition. You know, that on that countertop, how do you get your hand in there? What's graspable? How would you grasp it when you've never seen it? Mobilities for homes and work sites, being able to, and I sort of categorize it as 3 different levels of terrains. There's the flip-flop or high heel terrain, which this floor is pretty much. Then there's the sensible shoe terrain, which, you know, when you go for a walk down to the edge of the bay here, you might want. And then there's the hiking boot terrains. And so there's different sorts of walking. I think the first sort might be good enough for home delivery, for most home deliveries, for instance. But you'll need more for disaster relief. You need more towards the right of that list. Unintrusive human safety systems for high payload robots. As robots get bigger, they get nastier with their inertia. And so we don't want them to hit people. How are they going to be safe around people? At my company, Rethink Robotics, we delivered some of the first cageless robots, but we restrict ourselves to a certain mass of payload and a certain velocity where we can react fast enough from collisions. As they get bigger, you can't react fast enough. So we need better systems for that. Unintrusive human safety systems for completely unstructured environments where there's all sorts of stuff happening. And this gets to the elder care, closer physical interactions with humans, including human manipulation. Workplace affordance recognition. When a robot comes into your home, it would be nice if it could figure out, oh, that's the kitchen, just by the look of it. You can certainly do that when you go into someone's home. You don't need to be told, oh, this is the kitchen. You look at it, that's a kitchen. I know that's a kitchen. That's a bathroom. I know that's a bathroom. So being able to recognize those sorts of things across all possible workspaces. And then just notice when something's screwy and be able to deal with it. So all sorts of, these are challenges for robotics. There's places where machine learning can be used or not. But these, I think, are important challenges. So that's what I wanted to tell you about. It's too much hype. We have to deal with it. There's lots of opportunity, but don't forget making it real, because if you don't make it real, it isn't going to get used. And with that, I'll take questions. Anyone got a question? I think there's microphones. No one, oh, someone has a question, great.
Oh, good.
Or he's leaving, I can't tell.
So there's been a lot of talk in the last couple of years about essentially robotic uprising, taking as many jobs as possible from humans. And there's basically two trains of thought. The first is that this has been happening for the last 100 years. We replace horses with cars, and there's still an entire industry built around cars. So people think that with robots taking over human jobs, that there'll be new industries built around those new workers, new robotic workers. The opposing viewpoint is that this time it's different. So I was wondering which side you thought.
Yeah, it's a complicated question. It certainly wasn't good for horses last time around in terms of the numbers of them. They didn't have to do shitty work anymore, but they didn't exist either. So horses didn't do too well on that. And the question is, are we the horses this time? I don't think, I sort of bristle a little when people say, this time is different because now we have deep learning. I can't quite go there. But I think we see in the economics a real hollowing out of the middle class. We see a lot of political changes on what is reasonable for people to expect from their government, and there's been a push away from provision of services which we used to think were okay. So I think it's more complex than just the automation, but I think there's a whole bunch of things coming together in a bad way, and it's not gonna look good when history looks back at us if we don't figure some of these things out. I don't know what the answers are. People, do you have kids? Okay, who has kids here? Okay, which of you who has kids, when they were born, said, I hope my kid gets a great job in a factory? Who has that as what they wanted? No hands up. People don't want to do the jobs that used to sound like good jobs too. Our expectations have changed. I tend to think that, these are a great example of where people use sophisticated devices without any training because companies made them so they train the users on how to use them, and more of that can help with people being productive. But whether there's enough jobs in this, I don't know. I think there will be a lot more jobs in elder care, and it's going to take a change of thinking to think that looking after old people is a fulfilling job, because I think we're going to have a real need there. But it's a mess. Yeah.
Hi, I'm David Markowitz. I'm a program manager at IARPA. So you highlighted challenges for robotics, and you highlighted how other governments around the world are investing heavily in supporting new industries focused on advancing robotics. I'm curious where you see industry and the non-government funding mechanisms in the United States driving progress toward addressing those challenges in the near term. And I'd be very interested to get your and everybody else's thoughts on where the US government needs to invest to drive progress, where it won't happen organically.
Yeah, I think without trying not to get into current day politics, although the budget removed the whole funding for the manufacturing extension program out of the Department of Commerce, which enables which gives advice to small factory owners around the U.S. That's an example of something that was just plain silly happening. I think we have to support fundamental research still, and so I'm very worried about the current bill taxing graduate students, which is where it's going to decimate our fundamental research at the moment. So there's things like that. I think we have not in the US been able to say that we should have an industrial policy. And other countries are having industrial policy, and they're eating our lunch. And I think we have to get beyond that doctrinaire view that governments are the problem. No, governments in other countries are really pushing their countries along, and I think we have to figure out how to have that conversation in a data-driven way, which is going to be hard. The other thing I would say is let's keep every foreigner who comes here to study in the country, like me, because that's turning people away after getting degrees is just a silliness as far as I can see. We haven't had industrial policy. It has largely been the military who have run robotics research. It has been successful, but we need to find other ways to help robotics research happen and development. And there are some, in these megatrends, there are some existential issues for humanity which the VC model of funding will not address because there is no business model. And there we have to figure out how to get things to happen when there is no business model or no visible business model. Maybe there will be down the line, but not at the moment. Okay.
We have time for one more question.
Okay.
You got it.
Hi. Hey, Dr. Brooks. My name is Frank. I'm a program manager at Microsoft. And I think one part of your talk about accessibility, a lot of companies are really interested in that, providing accessibility for people who are disabled or people who have a learning disability. I'm just wondering how robotics can play a role in that in your perspective, bionic limbs and maybe helping people see, hear.
Oh, I think undeniably we're going to see, and there was a DARPA program just started fairly recently on brain implants, and we have maybe this, I'm not going to ask people to put up their hands, but there may well be people in this room who have neural implants enabling them to hear. There are a lot of people with those. So I think that is ripe for augmentation of people. I think robotics in general, filling in gaps in healthcare is going to be very important. And when you go to the big Japanese trade shows now, Robodex in Tokyo, you start to see a lot of research institutes showing off their robotics research towards elder care. Less of it in the US, less government funding for that, but it's going to be a real issue. I think Japan is pushing ahead right now because Japan sees it. They can't ignore it. It's become critical, and we start to see that in Japan. Yeah. So thank you.
Okay, Rod, I think